Ah.
Let's see.
Hello, my name is Christopher Chen, and I am the University of California Cooperative Extension Advisor for Viticulture and Enology for Sonoma, Mendocino, and Lake counties. And today we're going to talk about grapes. The most commonly cultivated species of grapevine, Vitis vinifera, is thought to have originated from regions around the Caspian Sea. Through trade and cross-cultural interaction, the vine was spread to Europe, where it was eaten, made into wine, and generally celebrated. Eventually, Vitis vinifera made its way around the world and would thrive in Mediterranean climates such as California and Australia and southern Africa. So grapevines are a fruiting vine that are endemic across the world and typically grow near some source of perennial water, whether that be lakes, rivers, or streams. They are very common. The majority of grapes that we see grown for food or wine are actually just one species, and that is Vitis vinifera. That means Chardonnay, Merlot, Cabernet Sauvignon, and all the table grapes and raisins that you see in stores are Vitis vinifera. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't other species of grapes that are grown for food. A great example of this is Vitis labrusca, also known as Concord. Concord is used for food and wine, but also in flavorings for grape flavored things like Jolly Ranchers or candies. Rootstocks encompass hundreds of species of grapevines, compared with Vitis vinifera, which is a single species that produces many different types of grapes. The rootstock species have many purposes as rootstocks. Rootstocks are used as an intermediary between the soil and the fruiting scion, the upper part of the grape, and they typically are more resilient to soil pests and pathogens than Vitis vinifera is. They became useful when grapevine phylloxera was introduced from the Americas to Europe. And in that time, viticulturalists and scientists found out that if you plant a grapevine in the ground that is endemic to the same region as phylloxera, which are the Americas, it's going to have more resistance to the pest and pathogen that it co-evolved with. So the source of rootstock use today is the defense against grapevine phylloxera. However, grapevine rootstocks today have many other uses, including drought tolerance, salinity tolerance, vigor control, and many, many more. No matter the training style of your grapevine, there are some similarities and differences in how they are structured. This is a cordon-train spur prune grapevine. It has a bilateral cordon, that means it has two sides to its cordon, and it also has arms. The arms support the spurs, which eventually will have the shoots for the subsequent year. As you can see, there is a trunk that's divided into upper, middle, and lower. The upper part of the trunk is also known as the head. It is where the cordon splits, either into 2, 3, or 4 different parts. This is very similar to the spur-pruned cordon-train vine. However, this is a cane-pruned head-train vine. There are still arms, as with the spur-pruned vine, and there's still a trunk and spurs, but instead of multiple spurs providing all of the fruiting canes for the following year, we have what are called fruiting canes wrapped around the wire that are about 8 to 10 nodes long, and these provide the shoots that will produce the fruit the subsequent year. We can also have head train spur prune vines, which are kind of a combination of the first two. You're still head training the vine. That means you're not growing and training a cordon out, but you have arms with spurs on them similar to the cordon train spur prune vine. Within a dormant bud of a grapevine, there are a lot of structures that are preformed and will eventually grow into the structures that you see during the spring and summer. In the season prior to their growth, they're formed into this bud. This bud includes 3 different shoots, the primary, the secondary, and sometimes called the tertiary, based on their size. And these have leaf primordia, which are preformed leaves, and flower cluster primordia, which are the preformed clusters for the first two clusters on each shoot. There are also up to 8 nodes preformed in this small bud. These will eventually grow into the main shoot and the lateral shoot, as well as the main leaf coming off of each node. In grapes that produce large fruit, like Vitis vinifera, once the shoot grows past its 8th node, these clusters will no longer form and instead they will become tendrils. Clusters are typically just modified preformed tendrils to produce fruit. So because the first handful of nodes on a grapevine shoot are preformed in the season before, they are very uniform and can be used in ampelography or identification of grapevines. The leaves on the 6th to 8th node are usually very distinct for each Vitis vinifera cultivar. A node is the growing point for each part of the shoot where leaves, laterals, or clusters will come out. Clusters are just modified tendrils, and as you get past the preformed area of the shoot, you'll notice that the tendrils actually replace where a cluster would be normally. Leaves on a grapevine shoot are alternating, so you get one leaf on the left, one on the right, then the next node is the left, and the next node is the right, and so on. So are tendrils, actually. When fruit is unavailable, the leaves of grapevines are often used to identify different cultivars of Vitis vinifera. And to do this, we have to select the correct leaves, which are between the 6th and 8th nodes of the shoot. They are preformed the season prior, just like the rest of the shoot in that region. And typically they are 1 or 2 nodes above the last main cluster. Grapevine leaves can be identified using their tomentum, or hair, their sinuses, which are the divots in between the lobes. The lobes are the leaf tissue, and many other features, including maybe the petiole color or the venation of the leaf itself.
Grapevines are vines, and they grow like vines in nature. They tend to climb the tallest thing that they can find, whether it's a tree or a small scaffolding. But humans like to train vines to look more like small trees, and it takes a lot of maintenance to keep it that shape and size. We do this for productivity and for quality and for ease of management. We don't have to use ladders to get to the fruit. Uh, However, we do have to maintain them on an annual basis to make sure that they retain their shape, their size, and their productivity. So there are two main kinds of training methods for grapevines. One is head trained, and head trained vines often look like small trees. Head trained vines are distributed from bottom to top, so vertically, and radially, so that the shoots will be fairly equally spaced apart. Uh, This is one training method. The other training method that's very common is cordon trained vines. And cordon trained vines are typically shorter, about 3 feet tall, and they have canes or cordons, depending on the style of pruning, laid across these wires. This is a cordon trained spur prune vine that's actually quite old. And as you can see, the arms are extremely long for a vine that's pruned and trained this way. If we look closer, you can see that the spur from this year is actually only a 2-bud spur. However, years and years of cutting back 2-bud spurs has led to the growth of this arm. And this is problematic for a number of reasons, but one is mechanical damage from tractors, mechanical harvesters will be much more severe if these arms are larger because they will grab onto the machinery much easier. Management of grapevines can be a complex process, but the majority of management decisions occur based on the developmental stage of the grapevine annually. For instance, during winter, which it is right now, you would want to do winter pruning of grapevines. And as we mentioned before, there are a couple pruning styles you could use for this. This one here is a head trained and spur pruned vine. So you would cut back the shoots from the previous year to 2-bud spurs. The one we saw previously was a head trained cane prune vine. And head trained cane prune vines are very similar, but you leave 1 or 2 canes that are 8 to 10 nodes long for the fruiting for next year rather than multiple spurs. In spring, The buds you left on your vine from the previous year will begin to push and break dormancy. You'll notice that there are often many more shoots growing than those that you left in the winter. So, for instance, you left, say, 20 buds on this vine. You might have 40 shoots in spring. And that's the result of latent buds. Latent buds have remained dormant under this older wood, the darker wood, for years. And if there are many, many more latent shoots or suckers, it's likely that your vine is imbalanced and needs more leaf area during this coming season. After bud break, vineyard owners should remove latent and excess shoots by hand before they begin to lignify. At this stage, they're easy to break off, but be careful not to break off shoots that you'd like to keep because those are also easy to break off. So look out for latent buds and try to keep the ones that you left on the spur or on the cane the previous year. Once shoots are 6 to 8 inches tall, the cluster inflorescences will bloom and self-pollinate. This is called capfall or anthesis. Now is a good time to count the number of clusters on each vine and how many successfully self-pollinated. This will give you a good crop estimate for the end of the season. Once your fruit is set, you'll want to make some decisions about balancing your vines. If you had lots of suckers in the early spring, leaving more shoots and leaves on the vine will help the vine balance out the excessive vigor that it has. If you had fewer suckers, basal leaves and lateral removal will balance the less vigorous vine. A single grapevine can produce a large amount of crop each year, but it may not be able to support all of the fruit to peak ripeness. Balancing the photosynthetic capacity of the vine with the amount of crop it's carrying is essential to maintaining high quality yields. Achieving vine balance, as it's called, can be as much of an art form as a science, and we'll talk more about that later. If you have red grape varieties, you'll notice VERAISON start occurring around July. This is the time period when water flow into berries decreases and sugar flows increase. This is actually a really good time to decrease the amount you are irrigating the vines, as they'll need less water for the grapes. Deficit irrigation can also improve the characteristics of the fruit at harvest. The majority of vineyards in California are irrigated with drip line. This is drip line, and each drip line runs typically the full length of a row, and emitters are placed at the edge of each grapevine to ensure adequate water supply. Drip emitters on drip lines come in different styles and flow rates. Typically, you'll see a half-gallon or 1 gallon per hour drip emitter. However, these emitters can get clogged, especially if you are fertigating or running fertilizer into your irrigation water and letting that run onto the soil. So to test to make sure your emitters are not clogged, what you should do is place either a measuring cup or a graduated cylinder underneath each drip emitter and time how long it takes to fill that measuring cup to a certain volume. At that point, you can multiply that volume to get gallons per hour, along with the time that it took to get to that volume. For instance, if you have a measuring cup that has milliliters, you could do 100 milliliters underneath one dripper, how long it takes to fill that up, and then convert the milliliters to gallons and multiply it to get the correct number of minutes it takes to fill 1 gallon. Vineyard irrigation in California is typically drip line irrigation with low inputs over long periods of time, somewhere between half and a full gallon of water per hour. However, there are other kinds of irrigation. For instance, here we have overhead irrigation. Overhead irrigation is very useful for frost control. You spray the water on the grapes and they freeze on the outside, and if you keep spraying the water all night long, they won't freeze inside. And this prevents frost damage on the crop. Finally, after all that work, it is time to harvest your crop in September or October. Be careful to avoid fruit contact with the vineyard floor and watch your hands. The vines will start to lose their leaves in autumn, and once they go dormant, the cycle starts again with winter pruning. Be sure that your red grape varieties do not have red leaves in the fall. This is a sign of disease. Grape leaves should always be yellow when they fall in the autumn.